Hello, my name is William Tincup. I am the president of Recruiting Daily, and we are here at Cornerstone's Convergence, the 16th Convergence, personally my 6th. And we're going to be talking with two Cornerstone executives and also an executive from T-Mobile. And we're going to be talking about talent acquisition and learning and the connective tissue between the two and the future of the workforce. So without any further ado, I want to make sure that you are following along, both on Facebook but also on Twitter. These types of activities, they go really well if you ask questions, because we've got a ton of questions. And you know, it'd be great if we just sat up here and answered our own questions that we were prepared for. But truth is, it's better if you ask us questions. So the hashtag is CSOD CONF 18. So Cornerstone On Demand Conf 18. So I'd like to introduce Brianna. Brianna, how are you doing?
Good.
Good.
Great
good.
to be here.
Great to be here. So you've recruited for a fair amount of years.
Thank you for not saying how many.
We won't get into how many. What are you seeing these days? What's new and what's occupying some of your brain these days?
Yeah. Let's see, what's occupying my brain? Well, a lot actually. And I would really summarize it as we're seeing this revolution that is really starting and it's happening. We're in the middle of it, that's similar, and it has that frenetic energy of when social media came out and how it changed the way we recruit. And what's unique about this revolution is that we're seeing this from the candidates and that they're driving this versus how we were driving it before. And that's what I'm really excited about, and that candidates are really helping to drive the change that we're seeing and the need for technology in recruiting.
Yeah, we used to have power.
It's all gone. No longer.
It went away. When did it go away? When will it come back?
I'm hoping.
But you're right. Recruiters used to be able to kind of demand and direct and coordinate in a certain way, and now the talent kind of dictates that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What questions do you think are you seeing candidates ask today that you didn't see a couple years ago?
Yeah. What we're finding is that there's been this shift, and we've seen that over almost 30% of our applicants are now coming through some type of social profile or through mobile. So we know that there is this demand for that type of technology and that type of way of application, which means that the way that we've been looking at resumes and the way that we've been evaluating and assessing talent coming in is shifting. They're no longer looking for just telling us that they've been able to do this work through this type of job that they've had, but showing us the skill set that they have from a myriad of different sources, whether it's certifications that they've had, right, or different classes and courses that they've taken, boot camps. And so there's a lot of shift in that, and we need to really evaluate and look at how we're consuming the information from the candidate a bit differently.
So you see, not just now, but a little bit more in the future, you see it less about jobs and more about skills?
More about skills, yeah. Everyone's taking some sort of personality assessment or a DISC
right.
assessment, you know that. Right. And everyone wants to share that information, or they've done different types of projects at their work that might correlate to a job that we have. And so it's important for us to be able to look at these jobs that we have or projects that we have and how do we recruit differently for them. I really do see us looking at recruiting in the future as project recruiting versus job recruiting, and how you're able to move your workforce around within the organization, looking at the skills that the individuals have coming
right.
in.
And I know you're thinking about just the external stuff, but you're also thinking about the internal and how people move within internal.
Right.
So we got our first question from Twitter, John. John asked, how long do you think it'll take before traditional resumes are kind of replaced with more of a cloud of assessment, skills and accomplishments and things like that?
Yeah, I would say it's already happening. If we're looking at using LinkedIn profiles right now for a resume, that's replaced the resume already. Or just any type of social profile. You could be looking at Xing in Germany or
right.
Naukri in India. There's a different type of social profile that people are looking at and evaluating candidates again. So I think we're in the midst of it. We just need to make sure that we're changing fast enough in order to allow candidates to give us the information that they want to give us.
So if it becomes a game of skills, let's say it's always been a game of skills.
Yeah.
All right. But it becomes even more a game of skills. How do we find out what the candidates want in terms of being skilled up or what they want to learn? How do we find that out while we're trying to recruit them?
Yeah, that's actually really a great point there when we're looking at skills. The feedback that we are giving now to candidates is evolving. Candidates don't want to just know, sorry, we didn't find, this role didn't work out for you, but
Right.
hey, here's a future opportunity that might be a great opportunity for you. And by the way, here's a course or something that you can take in order to upskill yourself for that. And that's really important to look at in the feedback that we're giving to individuals, as well as we did an assessment, maybe that you came in, we did an assessment, here are some skills that you're lacking and here's how we'll upskill you to be ready to hit the ground running once you start your position.
Right.
And so it's important that we look at skills and how we can develop the talent inside as well as outside
Right.
of our workforce to prepare for the future. And if you think about how we have more jobs available than we have people to fill those roles, we need to start finding ways to open up our talent pool. And so we've actually noticed this internally that we have talent that we need to hire. However, they're not enough skilled workers in order to find that talent. So we need to help develop them and skill them up, either our internal workforce and then external workforce in order to hire and open up that talent pool.
Right. I had a question that I wanted to ask you around mobile, because different candidates are going to apply to jobs differently. So
Yeah.
I don't want to use age or any of that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But what are you seeing from a mobile and/or an SMS perspective?
Yeah, we are finding that we are communicating with about 70 to 80% of our candidates via either mobile texting or WhatsApp. And that is something that is global. So we are communicating, we have a lot of applicants coming through that, up to 30%. And then we also have a lot of people that we're communicating just with throughout the interview process through mobile or some type of SMS.
So it was interesting. Yesterday, a gentleman explained to me about how we have historically learned to read left to right, top to bottom. And that folks that are younger, and especially people that play games, are used to getting all the content at once and then looking at the bottom. And so I want to kind of get your take on that, what you thought of folks and how they consume content, and really the recruiters. Is it a change in recruiting and the people that recruit? Do they need to have a different skill set?
Yeah.
So the broader question for you is, do our recruiters in the future need to have different skill sets?
100%. It's actually very much top of mind right now as we're looking at this. You think of the automation going on within recruiting and how much you see at HR Technology, how much automation is in AI is really affecting the way we're doing our work. It's going to shift what we do. We have, machine learning that's going to help us determine who will be most successful in this role, who we should look at, who we should interview. That really takes a lot away from the recruiter. Allows us to really manage that interview process more, but then also allows us to really engage in how we develop, how we train in other areas. So there's definitely a lot we need to look at as far as our skills and how we need to upskill for the future or reskill for the future in what we'll be doing. That's very important.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, let's do the hashtag. Hashtag CSOD, conf, CONF 18, because we're at Convergence, Cornerstones Convergence, which is a fantastic event. If you've never been, it's my, I think, 6 or 7th time. I'm sorry, stopped counting at one point. A question just came in from Shemi on Facebook, and it's about what are the skills that you're seeing that are needed for the future? So what are you seeing most skills-wise that will help people prepare for the future?
Yeah. I think Institute for the Future has a lot of skills that are really, really driving a lot of what we're looking for. Adaptability will probably be number one. And being able to be flexible and nimble within work. And you think about how quickly technology is changing the way we do things, that it's going to continue to be important for us to really be flexible and adaptable to our environment. Really looking at how we build followership. And that's where social media will play into a lot of this. And I think people have always been fearful of social media being a part of something that organizations see and being public, but it also can give us a lot of insight into followership and and you think about the marketplaces that we have like Etsy. I mean, that's somebody's occupation and what they're able to do through this kind of gig economy. That's also going to help us to see someone's potential and ability in that type of work that they're doing. So there are a lot of skills that we're looking for there. Now, what's going to be important for organizations is we will also need to have some type of skill in our organization in order to adapt to this, and that's really looking at how we enable our employees to work remote and have flexibility in their life. When you think about the things that are driving this gig economy, it really is looking at their flexibility, being able to work at times that work for them, and so that's really important for us.
Tara on Twitter just asked a fantastic question. I've got to read it verbatim. Normally I kind of summarize as best I can, but I got to read this. I got to read this exactly the way it's written because it's beautiful. Why? This is to you, by the way.
Oh.
Why is the skill gap happening? What is happening or not happening to create this reality?
Yeah.
What social, ethical, economic, educational, and or experiences that are creating this reality?
Yeah. It's the way the world is changing. Technology has actually peaked and is now moving faster than humans can keep up.
Right.
And so what we're looking at is we're scrambling to keep up with that, and as everything is advancing, we are trying to advance with it. And it's really interesting when you get to a point where you start looking for a position or a job or someone to hire for something that has only been around, a technology that's only been around for a short period of time. And so there aren't skilled workers in those areas. And so that's where we're finding this gap and where we need to train and we need to develop. And so that's what's having this impact is things are being created, and you look at the job titles of the future and what's going to be out there, and they're just mind-blowing. I mean, Adam spoke about some of them today.
Right.
And that's what we're getting is we need to keep up with the technology, and that's what's driving this, is we're trying to advance with everything that's being created.
Well, that was, first of all, great answer.
Oh, thank you.
Not that you need that. But it was also just a wonderful question from Tara. Thank you very much for asking that. Again, these things kind of live and die on the questions that people ask of us. So what I want to do next is actually introduce Jeff, who's also from Cornerstone On Demand. Jeff's the AVP of Learning and something of effectiveness.
Yeah, organizational effectiveness. Yeah, thanks for having me.
No worries. So the connective tissue between the two of you, what you're seeing in recruiting and what you're seeing in learning and how it all ties together. So the first question I want to ask you is, what are you seeing in learning, and how is learning changing just from candidates?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. You know, we've seen historically over the last 10, 15 years, even departments have moved from training functions into learning functions. So just the semantics around how we're looking at just calling the work puts learning more in the learner's hands. So what we're seeing fundamentally are some basic shifts from learning that's being done to people to learning that people are going to get. So, you know, historically in the learning field, we've heard about push versus pull, but now we're into push and pull and predict and prescribe.
Right.
So we're seeing people that are coming into the workforce now that are asking simple questions like, what's my learning path going to be like for me?
That's right.
What are you going to do for me? Why are some of the e-learning courses so long? And they can be 12 minutes long.
Yeah.
And they're saying it's too long. So, you know, they want it now because the trick with what's happening with learning is that there's so many different places people can go, whether it's to an e-learning vendor or just online, that people are just getting access to information in faster ways.
That's right. And that's changing kind of the way people want to learn, but also their expectations of learning in general. What I find fascinating is that candidates are now asking about learning and training in a way that didn't happen 5-6 years ago. Recruiters didn't get the questions. They didn't get the questions of, hey, how are you going to make me better? How are you going to make my skills better? So I find that fascinating because it ties our worlds together in a way. What's your sense on mobile learning and kind of micro learning?
Yeah, well, everything needs to be mobile. You know, that's just the way it needs to be moving forward. I mean, if you're not mobile, then you're just missing a huge population. And also, if it's mobile, then people are able, especially if it's mobile and micro, that's a big win. Right. Because, you know, people want to be able to open their phones up because phones are not just phones, really.
That's right.
You know, it's,
computers.
They're full-blown computers. And so people should be able to access information, be able to interact with it just on their mobile device. So at least what we're seeing with a lot of the vendors that we're using internally is that everything needs to be mobile ready because people are consuming mobile content just at clips that have never been seen before, not only just because it's new, but because it's exciting and it's fun and it's easy.
Isn't it fascinating that now when we have something happen at our house, we go to YouTube and look it up? Like I replaced a filter in my refrigerator just by going to YouTube to figure out how to do it. So I want to ask you a question about learning styles and learning differences, because I don't think folks know or understand how people like to learn or prefer to learn, and maybe even some of the barriers to learning. Could you talk a little bit about that?
It's a big question. I think historically what you would look at would be three fundamental ways that people can learn. It's the auditory, visual, kinesthetic. Everybody seems to be, or everybody just is, a blend of those three. However, if you can broaden it a little bit and take a look at different types of intelligence. Somebody named Howard Gardner did some research years ago on multiple intelligences, found that they're either 7, 8, or 9, depending on the version that you read. And I've always looked at those as talents or capabilities that people can access learning through. So whether it's musical, whether it's bodily kinesthetic, whether it's learning existentially. There's different ways that people engage with the material. And so just fundamentally the barriers to learning have really been removed. And so people are learning in varieties of ways. For example, you can go on and take a mobile course that will have closed captions, so you're able to see it and hear it. You're able to touch it with the gamification that's going on in learning. People are able to actually interact. Take a look at some of the work with VR or AR. People are really being able to interact with the learning. The thing that becomes fun about that is that if you're the trainer or the coach, you can, through the lens of augmented reality or virtual reality, watch and coach somebody on the other side of the world while they're interacting with learning. So you're able to coach and train and grow, and people are getting real-time feedback from anywhere in the world.
That train the trainer model or seminar model of training is maybe not necessarily a thing of the past. We've got a bunch of questions from Twitter and Facebook, so I want to get through a couple of them. Question actually for Bree from Caroline on Facebook. What industries do you see that are using kind of, or will be first to use more or less the non-traditional resumes?
I think it's going to be, it's going to be from all over. We've seen non-traditional resumes. I remember when social media came out, Murphy Good did this whole launch on a social media campaign, and people launched through YouTube videos. So it's happening now. We even saw that tractor, the version of the tractor today, and so that's something with agriculture, and so we'll need to look at people who've done training that way. So I think it'll probably start in technology and in the tech space first, but it will quickly adapt to various other industries. I think that it will be a shift that's more going to be driven by candidates and that first than necessarily us driving it.
Well, again, we're losing power.
Yes.
News at 11.
Losing power.
I actually wanted to do a follow-up question for you. So we're learning from candidates what they want to learn or what skills they want to develop, right? When should we also learn how they like to learn? And
when should we?
Yeah.
My angle on that has always been pretty much the same, which is ideally you want to give people access to information in as many modalities as you possibly can, which is why the train-the-trainer method may be sort of subsiding a little bit, but instructor-led training is never going to fully go away. It's where you start to see the instructor-led training followed up by a variety of different short materials or reading materials. So I think it becomes, the big shift we've seen in L&D has moved from, well, I run L&D, therefore I have all of the answers and I am the holder of the content, I'm going to tell you what you need, to we're now into content curation, where we're able to not only say, we had a couple of options when we recently went into the playlist functionality at Cornerstone, where we said, do we want to just let a few people create playlists? We can curate what we want the employees to learn, or do we just open it up and let anybody create a playlist? And our response was to let anybody open a playlist, because then you're able to really put the power of learning and training in everybody's hands, and you start to see more ownership.
I love that. It's kind of common sense, but it's not common sense, because you're meeting them where they are and where they want to learn and how they want to learn. So, that's fantastic.
Well, it's a new world too, which is exciting. So I like it.
Well, we're all consuming content differently. So it's like it's not like we're talking about a disconnected group of people. We all consume content in a much different way than we did years ago.
True.
All right, let's take another question from Twitter, and this is from Sarah on Twitter. How important do you think the traditional education will be in the future, in the resume of the future? Oh, this is fantastic.
Yeah,
I'm
I
glad.
love it.
Who wants this?
So first of all, Sarah, thank you so much for asking this question, because I was going to ask this question because I have a bachelor's and 2 master's degrees. So I want to I want to know why I wasted all that money. No, I'm just kidding. So from a recruiting perspective first, and then learning.
Okay.
What do you when you look at a traditional degree? What does it give you?
Yeah. This is something that Jeff and I have actually talked extensively about, and it is very interesting. It will be required in some areas. I mean, if you're looking at a doctor, you're probably looking at needing that traditional education.
Right.
However, there are a myriad of different areas that we're going to be looking at that shifting and that changing. So where we'll require it will be in those specific skilled areas, but then there will be everything else that we'll need to evaluate. What will correlate to what we need, and how do we look for potential and candidates that have this ability or have taken these certain courses or have these credentials, have worked on these certain projects, have these peer reviews that we can thus utilize to help us make a decision. So it's really looking at that and that potential.
All righty. Give it to us, brother.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've spent, I'm a retired university professor. I've spent 27 years in public education. So I've looked at this and thought about this a lot. And I think what college education specifically, and my daughter just graduated college 2 days ago, so it's all pretty
Congratulations.
Thank you. Is that still completing college or completing a master's degree shows fundamentally that you have the ability to set a goal and go out and complete something.
Right.
I don't think that's ever going to change.
Right.
But where it's going to get interesting is, let's just say, for example, that people are starting to create their own curricula, they're able to create their own badging system, and people can go out and take a variety of courses that will potentially be on these resumes for the future. Then you're going to start also getting into, how do we validate the quality of those? And so the piece of learning, which goes back to what Bree was saying, is that one of the key competencies that we're looking at for the future is somebody that's going to be a lifelong learner. And so I think whether you have a college degree or not, I mean, some of the biggest companies have been started by people that dropped out of college. So the idea of opportunity, for example, not only can not everybody on earth get into a college for a variety of reasons, but that shouldn't be a barrier to entry, a barrier to innovation, or a barrier to creativity. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. Colleges are never going to go away in their entirety, but I think it's just pivoting how we're looking at work and how we're looking at people coming into work.
So if we were to go on a career builder, and no offense to career builder, but if we went on a job site, how many job descriptions would we see that says bachelor's degree required?
Yeah, a ton.
Right?
Yeah.
Majority. So that's changing in the future, right? These skills are required is probably the most important.
Yeah.
All right, let's take one more question before we bring in Melissa from T-Mobile. And it is a very good question. This is from Ira. Are you having any discussions within your organization and clients about how far you're willing to allow the magic of AI and machine learning take over decision making? Any concerns or that personalized learning becomes so tight that learning becomes programmed almost at like our feeds in Facebook and or Google?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that a lot
Thanks,
of
Ira.
learning, and in fact, Slack recently was discussing that 88 or 89% of the learning that goes on at their company is done informally through channels. So I think that's the piece that people also need to remember, which is, as you're building out content and as you're building out programs like, a Netflix or a Spotify type model, certainly we can get to programmed instruction. But that's just the instruction part, where the learning, where you sort of carve the deep ridges in your gray matter, is when we're actually talking about things, when we're able to put those into practice and make them our own. And so, I think that's really going to be the key, which is, how are you creating an environment at work where people are able to talk about the work, talk about the learning, and I think that's where we're going to see learning morph into.
It's interesting because the way that the informal learning versus formal learning, I'd love to get your take on this. I've always thought that ratio was the same. It was just whether or not it was at the water cooler versus Slack. or something like that. Do you, first of all, just kill that myth? If I have that wrong in my mind,
I don't
totally
know
okay.
if you can quantify it because, for example, with formal learning, if I'm going to take a 7-minute e-learning course on
Right.
negotiation skills, I know that I've invested 7 minutes in formal learning.
Right.
So if I have 15 conversations, or I think about it at night, or I'm at the gym, or whatever it is that you're doing, and where you're talking to somebody at a cocktail party, talk to somebody at dinner, somebody says something, you read something, you're always going to be learning that. So
Right.
I think it's the key is what is the formal learning that we're putting
Right.
in place for somebody, and then how are we letting them, for example, you've got mastery. If you're going to run a retail organization,
Right.
there are certain behaviors and skills that you need people to replicate perfectly. I used to work at a coffee company, and we had to make sure they were making a perfect cup of coffee every single time.
Right.
That requires formal learning.
Right.
On the other hand, you got manager work, and then they need to go into the world of informal. How do you handle a difficult customer? How do you handle a difficult child? Different. So I don't think you can quantify it.
I think that for the audience, I think one of the things that we're also learning through this process is decoupling compliance from training and development and learning. Compliance is one thing. We need to do whatever we need to do compliance-wise, but that has very little to do with how candidates are changing what they want to learn, how they want to learn, et cetera. So when you think about compliance, still do all those things, but just let's think about them in a different way. Let's bring on Melissa Lanier Preston from T-Mobile. We're going to talk about all things Magenta.
Absolutely. There's never a bad day to talk about Magenta.
It's never a bad day to talk about T-Mobile either.
Excellent.
So, given the background of what we've heard from Bree and Jeff, what's your world look like right now with the connective tissue between recruiting and learning?
Oh, wow. I mean, we have so many intersection points within T-Mobile about recruiting and learning, right? T-Mobile as an organization is very focused on internal mobility and employee careers. So much so that I'm actually part of an organization that isn't called training or L&D. It's called employee careers, right? So, so from our organization's perspective, we really want to see folks come into T-Mobile and build a career. And we're having a constant conversation about careers that starts even before someone applies for a job. So if you go out and look at our T-Mobile Careers site, you'll see that we have documented 4 common career paths within T-Mobile, and it talks about what that job looks like at the entry level, all the steps that someone would take to progress, the support, including learning and development support that exists for those folks as they progress, and even information about the kind of compensation they might expect at those different levels, right? So we're trying to paint a really clear picture for folks who are considering joining our organization about the kind of amazing, outstanding career they might find at T-Mobile and at Metro PCS.
Well, one of the things for the audience, open up another browser and go to www.tmobile.careers, and you'll see what Melissa's talking about, because it's, first of all, it's wonderful that they kind of outline the career paths, and they're very transparent about compensation as well, which is they're answering questions that candidates have before the candidates can even ask them. Like, what am I going to be doing next? Where can I do this, that, and the other? What else are you seeing from candidates these days?
So, I mean, we are very focused on diversity at T-Mobile, diversity and inclusion. So we spend a lot of time looking at how to bring in folks who are diverse within T-Mobile. We have a strong pipeline. We're also incredibly focused on military hiring. And so we're working with folks who were in the military. We have some commitments around that, and trying to understand how better to connect them with employment, actually whether it's at T-Mobile or at some other organization. In terms of things that I think candidates are asking for, we have a really amazing early in career team, and they run an internship program, and so I have a lot of exposure to those folks, and some of what I was hearing you all talk about prior to coming up here and being on camera really resonated with me in terms of what we hear from our early in career teams, right? So those folks, when they come on campus, whether it's for the summer or in one of our TechX internships, right? They have so many questions about what is their career going to look like? What kind of development can they expect? What kinds of things might happen for them in 18 months, 2 years,
6 months.
That's right? The
3 months.
expectations are high.
Actually, 18 days.
And we're frequently competing for talent with some really amazing organizations. I mean, there's some cool places to get a job in Seattle, right? So,
That's right.
and the West Coast in general, and in the U.S. right now, right? It's not easy to get great people. So you have to have a really good story, and I think it has to be true, right? The story doesn't do it if the reality, the day-to-day in the organization doesn't back it up.
What skills are you looking for right now? What are top of mind? If they don't have them, what do you have to go pump into development? Or if they could just pop out of the University of Washington with these skills?
Pop out. Pixie dust. Yeah, that's what we
Very desperate. So what would those skills be for you?
So, I think that we look at it in two different ways, right? That my team creates programs that help people progress from one level in their career to the next. So what would have traditionally been called hypo programs, right? We call them top talent programs. And so we evaluate each level and say, okay, gosh, you've come into the organization and you're a mobile expert and you want to be a store manager one day, but your next step is associate manager. So what are the things that you need to make that step and be super qualified when you go into your interview? And that looks different than maybe if you're a manager and you're looking to be a senior manager, right? We have a program for that also. Right. It doesn't cover the same things. Right. So as you might expect. I would say generally within T-Mobile, the things that we find that leaders need are agility, right? Agile mindset, being able to flex. Our company changes all the time. We are hyper focused on our customers, and when we identify a new thing that would be great for our customers, it happens. And so people have to be very flexible. I think there's also a strong desire to have folks who are innovative, who can continue to think of new and better ways to do things. We hear that a lot. And honestly, solid communication skills, that is a thing that never goes out of style.
Never. No, it's not going to go out in vogue. I want to get all three of your take on a question that Dawn on Twitter asked about the resume of the future will look like. Let's not do flying car stuff. Let's just kind of keep it like in the next couple of years. What do you think that we're going to be consuming as what we would have been consuming as a resume?
You want me to field that first, or you want to start with recruiters? I'm actually curious to see where resumes go. I've seen some people get fairly creative with them. I've heard some people say that companies like LinkedIn will be the resume. I think where it's going to go is in a more creative way that people are going to be displaying their skills and attitudes. We heard Adam, for example, today talk about you have IQ, you have EQ, but you also have AQ, that adaptability quotient, if you will. So I mean, for example, if we're going to pontificate a little or take a big wild guess, maybe people are going to turn resumes into stories. I mean, storytelling has become huge now, so maybe it'll just fundamentally change how do you tell your story.
I love that.
I
love that a lot. Oh my God,
Yeah.
we can stay there for an hour. What about for yourself? What do you think it's going to look like?
What do I think it's going to look like? I spend a lot of time in my job thinking about internal mobility, not as much time thinking about how to bring candidates in from the outside of T-Mobile. And so what I see when we think about how to get people really connected with their next great opportunity is how do you make sure they have the potential, the performance, and the relationships to be able to connect with that next hiring manager, really knock their socks off, and get offered that job. Right? So I think that building relationships and finding a way to to make that happen, especially in a large organization, is super important. Being able to demonstrate your performance and your potential, and I would love to see a resume of the future, particularly for internal mobility, that allowed people to do that. So I think maybe it happens through some sort of social platform where you're getting a lot of really positive peer feedback, and you also can connect with future hiring managers. And so it becomes more of maybe a living document than a nice piece of paper.
Right. Like a snapshot in time. We're out of that business.
Yeah.
What about yourself?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with both of you, but I think it's evolving into this type of persona, if you will, and an aggregate of all of the data and information that would follow that individual. And that could come from social profiles, it could come from things that they've done as far as assessments or peer work and projects that they've worked on, all really aggregated into this one living document that becomes the persona of this individual, and that's what we'll be looking at as the future.
It's funny, Melissa, you mentioned communication, and in my mind I was thinking about charisma and how you communicate with someone, the hiring manager, and how you convince them that you're the right person for the job.
Yeah.
We have a learning and gamification question. So I want to actually ask both of you this question. And this question does come from VJ on Facebook. Thank you, VJ. Appreciate you. How do we make learning more fun? And so VJ's coming at it from gamification, but y'all are doing with this stuff every day. So how do we make it more consumable, I guess, is one way to think about it. And gamification could be a way, but how do we make learning fun?
So I can talk a little bit about what we're doing and some things that we're considering. So in terms of how we've made it both fun and effective, right? I am always looking for the options that make learning both sort of easy, simple, innovative, but never losing sight of the fact that ultimately at the end of the day, if the learners haven't really learned, then T-Mobile's wasted its money, right? We've wasted the time we paid that person, we've wasted the investment in the content. So we've done a lot with microlearning. We have a lot of video-based learning that also cues the person up to immediate activity and immediate feedback with their manager, right? So when you think about the moment when you've learned something new in microlearning, and it's a small thing. So say I've learned something in a leadership class about asking probing questions, right? You've consumed a 5-minute or 3-minute, or sometimes if we're really good, 90-second video on that topic, and then you receive a little note in the system that says, okay, next meeting, 2 meetings today, whatever it is, go try to do that. And then check in either socially or with your manager and debrief and talk about how was that for you? What did you learn? And so the opportunity and also the requirement for immediate application is really driving a lot of engagement.
Right.
And so people do find it to be fun. They find it to be engaging, and we also see a lot of really great
It's
results.
like you're putting them on a mission of sorts.
Yes.
Very, very cool.
Yeah, I think that was a great answer. I think part of it is looking at the first key word, which was fun.
Yeah.
I think people that are now starting to worry about whether learning is fun or not are kind of missing the point. Right. Which is why I was glad you talked about engagement. Because I would argue that fun when it comes to learning is defined by I can do something different as a result of what I just did.
Right.
And so I think the gamification idea is phenomenal depending on how it can potentially be used. For example, I used to play The Sims. So Sims was an exciting little game. You could play and build a city. Will that potentially be an idea in work where you'll be able to build a company or a division, and you'll be able to take certain skills and then you grow an empire through that? Could that be fun? Could it be gamified? Sure. The key is going to be effective. And so I think part of it is really blending the formal instructor-led training, because while I love e-learning, I fundamentally believe that nothing can take place of human contact. And I think that ability to coach, build a relationship with people, I mean, you mentioned that earlier, which is the relationship piece. So I think gamification is obviously huge. I mean, we do a lot of badging internally at Cornerstone. There's a lot of that kind of recognition. Right. But gamification is just fundamentally going to change, especially with VR and AR. I was watching at a forum in Dallas recently. they were doing a display where somebody was, they were fixing valves, and it was a high pressure, high danger scenario where they were training people on this 45 specific steps and behaviors. My question I immediately left with was, I said, I can see where that works at a store or running a truck.
Right.
Where will this be in the world of negotiation or sales training?
Right.
And their comment was, which was brilliant because they were VR, AR people, is we're at the point now where anything is possible.
Right.
And I think that's where you're going to see gamification. Even how we look at gamification is going to probably change in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
So it's a great question.
It's like the negotiation. They're putting you in different scenarios so that you have to practice and keep winning and things like that. What I love, Melissa, is you're closing that circle. You're putting them on a path. They have to go then do it. Then they have to report back. I love that. I absolutely love that. All right, we got a couple more questions. So, question from Matt on Facebook. A lot of organizations have great learning programs, but employees don't actually have the time to engage in them. How do you suggest organizations build in time for employees to learn and or really make it a priority? Great question. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate you, brother. I'm going to go with you first.
Yeah. That's sort of goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is it puts the onus on us to give them good content.
Right.
And if we give them stuff that doesn't meet their needs, isn't engaging, isn't if they're going to go and look for stuff and they can't find it, then that creates an enormous problem. In terms of the time, I sort of smirk every time I hear people say we don't have time, because the easiest example I'll give you is we have a lot of e-learning within Cornerstone. But we also have one fundamental leadership seminar that I teach. It's 3.5 days. People have found it to have a lot of value, and now I have a wait list of about 85 people deep that have told me, I will make the time, just let me know when the next one is there. So I think it's important for people to understand you've got to develop time management skills. That's a perfect place to go work on that with a short e-learning video and then practice stuff. But in terms of do people have time, how do you make time? That's got to be part of the management training program as well, is to let your managers know you have to demand that from your employees. You have to make them make that time, because it's going to keep them engaged. It's going to develop their skills. It's going to retain them.
Right. Well, the old axiom of and the old conversation we used to have about training is, well, what if we train them and they leave?
Yes.
And what if we
don't train them and they stay?
Right. So I think we're past that. Actually, I hope we're past that. How would you answer that question?
So I would answer it differently depending on the level of team member that we're talking about, right? If you are talking about someone in a frontline role, if they're in a call center or if they're in a store, they need help, generally speaking, to make time, because they're scheduled. And when they're scheduled, they're expected to work, and there are customers in the store, and nobody's going to turn their back on a customer to go take their e-learning course, right? So as we look at these HIPO programs that help progress folks in the front line, we do ask the leaders to make an upfront commitment to set aside time where folks will be scheduled, paid, and they'll have access to the training materials, right? And so that is something that we have found makes a huge difference in terms of people being able to prioritize their development. It is not perfect, does not work perfectly, but it really puts a stake in the ground, because the leader is then invested in that person, and through the program they're acting as a coach. So it's a time commitment for both parties. When you start to talk about folks who have more discretion over their time while they're at work, I completely agree with the other answer that nobody wants their time wasted, right? We all exist in a world where we don't have enough minutes in a day to do everything we'd like to do. And so to get people to prioritize a learning experience at T-Mobile, right, we're not a mandate culture. We don't make people do things. So in terms of the leadership workshops that we offer, people have to want to go. And they want to go when the skills and things that they take away are really relevant to their job. And you just see that's the way that it works. So you launch something, and when the word gets out that it's really great, the waiting list builds. Yeah. And I just don't know that it works differently in the ILT world, in the workshop world. In the e-learning world, I think it's a struggle, right? We have found the most traction with the short videos, and particularly the short videos that are custom made. Like, we have a videographer on our team. That's how many videos we make, and we have a running joke that it's hard for people to learn something unless the person who's shared it with them has on their magenta, right? So we have a strong bias for custom content at T-Mobile, and so. I think when you start to talk about long e-learning modules, even if the content is great, generic, it's hard to get folks excited about doing that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Do y'all care, and this is a little off topic, but do y'all care if someone consumes content and we can't validate necessarily if they got a skill or got what we wanted them to get out of it?
Well, I think it depends on what they're taking.
Okay.
Because a lot of times it takes hours of deliberate practice for you to truly learn something.
But is it tested for? Do we care about on the other end of that?
You could. I think for certain things you can absolutely add in tests, and there are certain e-learning providers that do have comprehension checks, knowledge checks.
Right.
But yeah, we always tell managers, if your employees are going to be taking training, make sure you're looking at their transcript, know what they're taking, and talk to them about what are they doing and how are you going to do something different. It goes back to the coaching piece of management.
Right. So, have you had instances, either of you, where people want to learn things that are maybe off the beaten path of what we want them to learn?
Oh, yeah.
So what do we do with that?
In terms of things like management training, right? We have many, many folks who aren't people managers who are interested in management training. Our management training is unrestricted. If you want to take our program called Manager Hacks and you're not a manager, have at it. It's in Cornerstone. Knock yourself out. We don't try to block people from developing, even if it's not the thing that I would say is most important for that person in their next step.
Yeah, the way I'd answer that is that I would agree. We also do a little bit of a different slant on instructor-led training. We do a thing called development days. We do them 5 times a year, where employees train other employees on virtually anything. It's stuff that they want to teach people. And so to your question about if it's off the beaten track, we can cover off the beaten track. We've had classes on fossils and winemaking and pottery, and what we found is that it's a way to build teamwork and collaboration. And Breeze taught a number of courses as well. If
that's what keeps them there, that's what keeps them engaged, why not?
Yeah.
All right, we have a million questions on Facebook and on Twitter. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but I do want to get to Christy's on Facebook. Where can I get more information on the future of work and start preparing my organization for the changes to come? Well, Christy just so happen to have a website for you that I will now enroll. And it's csod.com/skills economy. So csod.com/skills economy. Skills economy, period. You don't have to put anything else after it. All right, final thoughts. So we've talked about recruiting, how candidates have changed things. We've talked about how that is bled over into learning, which we probably didn't see a couple of years ago. And you've given us some wonderful things to think about that y'all are doing. Congratulations, by the way. So why don't we just do some final thoughts? What do you think? What would you like to tell the audience?
I think if you're in an L&D position, or even if you're not technically, you're in an L&D position, is continue to look for different opportunities to learn something new and add different feathers to your hat, and share learning socially, share it with people in your organization.
I would say that the world is changing very quickly, and so the most important thing you can do as a learning and development professional is not be afraid to try new things, right? That many times it's the fear of doing something that's not going to land well, that's not going to be perfect, that holds people back from finding the things that will be amazing. And so you have to find the courage, even if it's with a tiny test group, to dig up your wild ideas and get out there and try them and get some feedback.
Oh, yeah. I would say learn something new, try something new. That definitely is very important as we look at. And I think it's also important to look at what is going to be changing about what you're doing and prepare for that. And we help our organizations to lead out on that. How will our environment be changing and what do we need to prepare for? It's important to look towards that future. We're ready for it.
So last thing for me, there's only two platitudes in marketing, fear and greed. So one of the things to think about in learning is the fear of missing out, FOMO. So one of the things, if someone else is doing something and they're learning something, communicating that within your organization to maybe motivate someone to then think, man, I'm missing out. I'm not taking advantage of the things I could be taking advantage of here. So that's my last thought. This is blown by. We've been here for 40 minutes. It doesn't feel like it. And I know we could go much longer. Again, the hashtag CSODConf18. We're going to keep looking at those questions and try to answer those questions. But for now, this Facebook Live is a wrap. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun.
That was good.
That was really fun.